everyone, Sophie here. Today I'm showing you the design process and the carving process and the printing process, basically all the way through for this Linocut that I made with the theme of California poppies. In this part, I am just sketching out the different parts of the flower. I have an idea to make a geometric design, almost a pattern, but not really. A geometric design based on all of the parts of the California poppy plant. So I'm sketching out the flower at the different phases, the buds and the open flowers, and I'm sketching out the leaves. And then I'm placing them on my overall design. So this one is 11 by 14. And no, it's about 9 by 11, and it's going to be printed on an 11 by 14 sheet. So those blocks, I used the pink block. It's called Speedy Carve. I had tried in my testing, a gray Linocut block that was a little bit harder, and my hand got a little bit sore, and it was a little harder to carve, which it wasn't super hard to carve, and you can get finer lines with it, I think, but I was pretty happy with this pink one, and since it was a very large project, I wanted to make it as easy on myself as possible. So it looks green right now. That's because in order to make it easier to carve, I took some acrylic paint, and I used the same roller that you use to print with. It's called a brayer. I used the brayer to just coat the entire thing in this kind of green color of acrylic paint because it contrasts really well with the pink, and when you just get this block new, the surface is exactly the same color as when you carve into it, so it's really hard to see what you're doing. You can't see the lines that you've made very easily, and since I'm doing such a detailed carving right here with these leaves, I'm outlining each leaf individually with fine lines, and so I really need to be able to see what I'm doing. And some blocks that you get will actually have the surface color being either a little bit darker, I think usually darker, not lighter, a little bit darker than, or at least a different color than when you carve into it, so that you can see what you're doing very easily. But if you use these pink blocks, I would definitely recommend go ahead and paint it with some other color. Any paint that I've put on mine, I've always used acrylic paint, and it does not affect my final prints at all. The tool that I'm using here is the Speedball tool. It came with 5 different tips that you can use, and the end of the tool actually screws off, and you can store all 5 of them in there when you're not using it. The one I'm using to carve the leaves is the smallest one. It's called the number 1, and it makes the finest lines out of all of them. They go from making a fine line to a thicker line, and then they get thicker and thicker until the number 5 is really quite fat, and it's basically for gouging out large open areas. So I'm using the number 1 tool right now because on this step I'm outlining all of the leaves, and I'm using a very fine line to outline them because essentially my vision for this project is I want the leaves to be black and all surrounding the flowers and plant parts as a very interesting shape and background to contrast those whites. Here I am using a Molotow marker, and I am just going to outline some stuff with it to help with the carving. They sell these empty markers, and then they sell the black acrylic paint in a refill, and so I'm just pouring some of that into my marker to get it going again. And then I'm outlining these flowers and everything that I want to keep white, so that when I'm putting all of my leaves in, I can stop the outline just before it reaches those shapes, so that it doesn't encroach into that nice white border that they are already going to have, the nice shape that they're already going to have. Carving out these leaves was a time-consuming process. Overall, this entire block, including the flower shapes and the lettering, took me about 3 days. Not consistent work, but I just work a normal job during the day, so after work I spent my afternoons on it for 3 days. However, I did think that it was going to be worth it, and I do love the final outcome of everything because I had done a couple of test designs where I tried first where I just used the larger gouge to make the leaves, and I could carve the leaves all in one stroke, so it was a lot faster of a process, but I didn't like how it looked as much because then the leaves were carved out and the leaves were white as well as the rest of the design, and so that contrast just wasn't there, and it wasn't quite what I was envisioning anyway for the piece. So I ended up taking that test design and coloring everything in on it, and I loved how it looked with the black. So I ended up deciding that I was going to take the time to carve out all of these leaves, even though it was going to take a lot longer to outline them rather than just gouge them out as individual shapes. Here, I'm coloring in the leaves that I've already carved so that I can keep track of my overall design. I'm just doing them one patch at a time, and so I want to just keep track of where I'm at with building the overall shape of it. This is my finished design after I'm finished carving everything out. It turned out exactly how I was imagining it, and I was super happy with the overall effect at the end. So here we are actually making the prints, and I'm using, again, more Speedball products. It's just what my local art store carries. It's all that they carry, but I was also very happy with them. The first brayer I got, it didn't really work out, so I had to take that one back, but I'm working here with, it's called a soft brayer. They have like a hard material one and then this more foamy material one. It's not quite foam and it's not quite soft either, but it was softer than the one I was using at first. So the other one is supposed to be better for fine detail. This piece does have a lot of fine detail, but the soft brayer is still working great for it. So I'm using the Speedball brayer and the Speedball water-soluble printing ink. Now, I actually tried out the non-water soluble, I think it's called oil-based potentially, and they're actually both oil-based. The water-soluble one is also oil-based, except they have modified it so that you do not need to use solvents to clean it up. My mistake was using the oil-based one first, and it just got everywhere and it stuck to everything, and it was very, very hard to clean. This water-soluble version, to me, it prints the same. It makes gorgeous prints, but you just rinse off your supplies at the end. So I'm also using a spoon to rub them. I just got this spoon from my kitchen. I adopted it for my art room because I watched a bunch of videos online and saw that you could use a spoon to make your prints. At first I was just kind of rubbing them with my hand. This is my first full-size print, so I'm still very new to the process and still trying out what works best. The spoon really did seem to work. You can use any wooden spoon that you want. They also make these pads that you can use to put pressure on the design. The most important thing is that you have something that you can rub the back of the paper so that everything is evenly coated with ink and you get a very nice transfer to the page. What I've learned in the process, this is my first full-size Linocut. I've only practiced a couple of times up to this point, and what I've noticed is that it's pretty easy with Linocut to get a good print, even a great print right off the bat, even as a beginner. Some papers receive the ink better than others. This paper that I'm using in the video is just a craft paper that I have very large sheets of it. So before I got my ink all laid out and started the printing process, I have cut the papers down to the size that I want, 11 by 14, and I have them ready to go because once I have started the printing process and I have my ink all out and everything, I'm not going to be able to stop and cut more papers. So I gave myself 3 different tries, hoping to work out the kinks in lining it up and making a perfect print because this one is going to my friend as a gift. They have a very gorgeous poppy garden in their backyard, which was the inspiration for this. So what I hope to get out of this session, and what I do get out of this session, is a perfect print to send to them as a gift. And also, since this is my first full-size print, I want, for my own artistic process, to be able to make a perfect print. By this point, I also have worked out sort of how to brayer, how to get the ink onto the block without really too much trouble. You need a certain kind of ink consistency for each kind of paper, and for the craft paper, it's pretty easy. It's not too picky about the ink consistency, but I have done enough test prints at this point that I kind of know what I am looking for. And I also have worked out how to apply the ink to the block in an even way so that it doesn't get, so that I can line it up with the edges and be really careful to where it doesn't leave a lot of that feedback, or that noise as they call it, picking up some of those raised parts of the background. So I really have most of it worked out, and I'm just really trying to line it up here. And on my third try, this one, I think that I've come up with a pretty good method. And so, this one turns out perfectly centered, and all I did was I centered the bottom of the paper along the bottom edge of the block, and I just rolled it out, and then I started making my print. So I'm doing this on a tabletop mat with a bunch of grid lines. So I'm just lining up the block on the lines from my mat, and then I'm putting the paper a couple lines down from that where it's supposed to be the edge of the paper. And that works pretty good. I do that last craft paper print and then the very last print of the set, this one that I'm about to make, with that method, and they turn out really well lined up. I know you can have different ways of marking your page in order to line these up, but for me, I think that's what I'm going to use moving forward. I'll just line it up on my mat, because both methods that I used for trying to just hold it over and line it up by sight, neither one of those worked for me. This next paper that I'm using was from a large roll. It's called Vellum. I didn't like it too much for drawing paper, but it's very smooth, so I thought it might be really good for making a print. And like I said earlier, I just kind of used every paper that I had to try making prints to see how they received them. All the papers performed just a little bit differently, so I just tried everything to see what I liked the best. So I have this vellum here. It's really nice. The really nice thing about this vellum is that you can kind of see the design through the sheet, which makes the printing process very, very satisfying. And it's also a lot easier to tell where you have rubbed the ink enough to get a perfectly even transfer. Overall, I really loved this process, and I had a great time coming up with this design and making these Linocut prints. I did a lot of work up front to make sure that the design came out exactly how I was envisioning it, and it really did. I was so satisfied with the final product, and so satisfied also with the whole process of Linocut. I have been wanting to try it for years, and I am so glad I did. I hope you all enjoyed coming along with me for this, and I'll see you in the next video.